Okay, so have you ever felt like you just can't seem to get your point across? Like you're in a conversation and it feels like you and the other person are speaking completely different languages. I recently read Master the Art of Negotiation by Mitch Jackson, and chapter one really resonated with me on this. It made me realize we negotiate all the time in our lives, but we don't always have the tools or strategies to do it effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that Jackson actually starts the book with this really intense negotiation scene, like a high-stakes boardroom kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it kind of pulls you in right away. But then he makes this point that I think is so crucial. He says that negotiation isn't just about those big dramatic moments. It's happening all around us in our everyday lives. Like when you're trying to decide where to go to dinner with friends
Mm-hmm.
or what movie to watch. That's negotiation too.
That's so true. And I think a lot of times we don't even realize we're negotiating in those moments. But one thing that really struck me about Jackson's approach is how much he emphasizes the importance of preparation. He's not just saying, go in there and wing it. He's saying you need a strategy.
Exactly. It's not enough to just show up.
Yeah.
You have to show up prepared. And one of the key things he talks about is the power of knowing your BAT&A, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It sounds kind of jargony, but it's actually a really simple concept.
So, like, what does that look like in a real-world scenario?
Okay, so let's say you're in a job interview and you're negotiating your salary. Your BAT&A might be having other job offers lined up or being willing to walk away if you don't get what you're worth.
So it's like having that backup plan gives you more leverage.
Exactly. And Jackson tells this crazy story in the book about a real estate deal he worked on where his client had a really strong BAT&A, had another buyer lined up and ready to go.
Yeah.
And because of that, they were able to negotiate a much better deal than they initially thought possible.
Wow. So having a strong BAT&A can really change the game. And speaking of different parts of the negotiation process, Jackson also talks about something called the ZOPA, right?
Yes, the zone of possible agreement. It's basically that sweet spot where both sides can walk away from the negotiation feeling like they got a fair deal. Like imagine you're buying a used car. You have your maximum price you're willing to pay, and the seller has their minimum price they're willing to accept. The ZOPA is that range in between where you can both agree on a price.
So it's kind of like finding that common ground.
Exactly. And what I find really interesting is how Jackson talks about actually identifying and navigating that ZOP. Because it's one thing to know it exists, but it's another thing entirely to actually find it and use it to your advantage in a negotiation.
Right. It's like having the map, but still needing to know how to read it.
Exactly. And he talks about how crucial it is to understand the other party's interests. Because a lot of times what people say they want and what they really want are two different things.
So it's about looking beyond the surface level demands and trying to figure out what's really motivating them.
Exactly. What are their underlying needs? What are their fears? What are they hoping to gain from this negotiation?
And how do you even begin to uncover that kind of information?
Well, Jackson talks about the importance of asking the right questions and really listening to the other person's responses. And not just listening to what they're saying, but also paying attention to their body language and their tone of voice.
So it's like being a detective almost.
In a way, yeah. You're gathering clues, trying to piece together the puzzle of what makes the other person tick.
Because once you understand their motivations, you can start to tailor your approach accordingly.
Exactly. And that's where empathy comes in.
Empathy in negotiation.
Yeah. Jackson actually argues that empathy is one of the most powerful tools a negotiator can have.
That's interesting. I've never really thought of it that way before.
It's about being able to see the situation from the other person's perspective,
Yeah.
even if you don't agree with them.
So it's not about manipulating them. It's about understanding them.
Exactly. Because when you can understand where someone else is coming from, it becomes much easier to find common ground and build rapport.
And that can make a huge difference in the outcome of a negotiation.
Absolutely. So how do you take all of this and apply it to something like a salary negotiation? Because that feels very different from, say, negotiating the price of a used car.
It does feel higher stakes, that's for sure.
For sure. And in those situations, your research becomes even more important. You need to know what the industry standard is for someone with your skills and experience. You need to be able to articulate the value you bring to the table.
So it's not just about throwing out a number and hoping they'll say yes?
No, not at all. You need to be prepared to back up your request with evidence.
And that's where knowing your BAT&A comes in handy again, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if you know you have other options, you're not as likely to settle for less than you deserve.
It's about knowing your worth and being confident in your ability to walk away if you need to.
Exactly. And Jackson talks about how important it is to frame your request in a way that highlights the benefits to the other party. So instead of just focusing on what you want, focus on how giving you what you want will help them achieve their goals.
So it's about finding that win-win situation.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point that Jackson makes about the different phases of a negotiation. He talks about how crucial it is to set the right tone from the outset.
So first impressions matter.
They really do. You want to come across as confident, but not arrogant,
Huh.
cooperative, but not a pushover.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about building rapport with the other person, even if you're in a high-stakes negotiation.
Because at the end of the day, you're both human beings.
Exactly. And then once you've established that foundation of trust and rapport, you can start to explore the issues at hand and look for areas of agreement.
And that reminds me of this one time I was trying to get out of a speeding ticket. So I tried to use some of these negotiation tactics on the officer. And, well, let's just say it didn't go so well.
Yeah, probably not the best time or place for that. But it actually reminds me of another important point that Jackson makes in the book. He talks about the importance of knowing when to walk away from a negotiation.
Oh, that's huge. How do you know when you're better off just walking away?
Well, sometimes no deal is better than a bad deal. It's about recognizing when the ZOPA, that zone of possible agreement, just isn't there.
Right, like when you've exhausted all the options and there's just no way to reach a mutually beneficial outcome.
Exactly. And that's where understanding your non-negotiables comes in.
Non-negotiables.
Yeah, those are your deal breakers. The things that if the other party can't or won't agree to, mean you're better off walking away.
So it's about having those boundaries clearly defined in your mind before you even start negotiating.
Absolutely. Because it's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment and make concessions that you later regret.
That makes total sense. Having those non-negotiables in place can help you stay true to your values and your goals.
Precisely. And it all circles back to that idea of preparation being key. Jackson actually compares the negotiation table to a chessboard.
Oh, interesting analogy. How so?
Well, he says that every move you make in a negotiation has consequences. And the best negotiators are the ones who can anticipate those consequences and plan their moves accordingly.
So it's about being strategic, not just reactive.
Exactly. And that takes practice. It takes self-awareness. It takes a willingness to learn from your mistakes.
Because nobody's born a master negotiator.
Right. It's a skill that you develop over time. And one of the best ways to get better at it is to start viewing everyday interactions through this lens of negotiation.
That's so interesting. So even those small everyday conversations can be opportunities to practice these skills.
Absolutely. Every time you interact with someone, you're negotiating in some way. You're trying to get your needs met, and so are they.
I've never thought about it that way before, but it makes so much sense.
It's all about understanding what motivates the people around you, how to communicate your own needs effectively, and how to find those win-win solutions.
It sounds like mastering the art of negotiation can have a ripple effect throughout every area of your life.
Absolutely. It can help you build stronger relationships, advocate for yourself more effectively, and ultimately create more fulfilling and successful outcomes in all areas of your life.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into the first chapter of Master the Art of Negotiation. What a great place to start.
It really lays the groundwork for understanding the power of negotiation and how we can all become more skilled and effective negotiators.
And for our listeners who want to unlock their own negotiation superpowers, I highly recommend checking out Mitch Jackson's work.
He offers so much valuable insight and practical advice.
So until next time, remember, everyone has the potential to be a great negotiator. It starts with that first step of awareness and willingness to learn.